Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about Autechre and their fourth album, Chiastic Slide. Alright then, so we made it through the trilogy of classic 90s Autechre albums. Now we move on to the point at which Autechre shed much of the 90s from their sound. The previous three albums, while mostly doing their own thing, still relied pretty heavily on sounds and rhythms and textures that are kind of a product of their time and that mid-90s IDM sound. This album has a little bit of that, but for the most part they're slowly leaning more and more on their more abstract textures and synth tones that are more easily recognizable as their own. It also makes an interesting parallel with Try Repeat, because, like, a lot of these tracks are structured in the same way as the tracks on there, kind of building on themselves at the same pace. Although this project contrasts it pretty heavily by having a more laid-back and much less industrial-heavy sound. I think that's where the title comes from as well. As I learned, like, 3 days ago or something, chiastic is a real English word that basically means having two parallel phrases that are like the reverse of each other. Hence the pronunciation I went by. Now there's the question of how this album fares personal enjoyment-wise. And, there's tracks I really like on this one. It does have its moments. On the whole, though, this is definitely one of their lower-ranked projects for me. Yeah, we've made it to the first album from these guys that shows a prime example of me just being left emotionally cold by their work. And yeah, I'm sure lots of people will flood in to talk about how this album saved their life and has, like, really strong emotional connections to them now. But I just mean for me. This album has only ever just been there without me feeling strongly either way about it. Thing is, this album is kinda at that crossroads between their more conventional stuff and their more experimental stuff, and doesn't strongly lean into either appeal. It's too abstract and unwieldy to stick in the head and become catchy, but it's not experimental or out there enough to really wow me either. And not to say it's unpleasant to listen to or anything, and I will give it this as the singular leg up it has on Try Repeat. That album's synth and percussion tones could be quite grating, and the kind of thing that would wear out on me if I listened to it enough times within a small span of time. This project did not do that. My reaction to it basically stayed exactly the same every time I put it on. Even if I put it on multiple times in the day, every listen still felt fresh, like I was listening to it for the first time that day. It never, like, wore out on me. And not to say this thing left zero emotional impact on me either. When I say it left me cold, I also mean that in the sense that this whole project has this very wintry and chilling feel, as if it takes place in the dead of winter in the middle of some random town in Alaska or something. And not in, like, the detached from civilization way that I get out of, like, Biosphere Substrata. There's people around you, but nobody around gives a fuck about you or what you're doing, and they'll probably be dickish if you try to talk to them. I mean, that is a pretty specific feeling. I'll give it credit on that front. It's undoubtedly an experience you can't get elsewhere. But it's also an experience that has a lot of very dry and dull spots, and for the most part just doesn't really grab my attention that well. Alright, I guess it's time to get into individual tracks then. I suppose I'll get the biggest positive and negatives out of the way. There are two tracks on this project that never left my favorites, and one track that was consistently my least favorite, without really having to think about it much. My least favorite was pretty consistently the second track, Reddick AC. Basically an interlude which sounds like the result of strapping a microphone to your ankle and walking through the snow. I mean, it's an interesting idea and I never skip it. It's far from unlistenable, but it is the track with the least substance here. Feels a bit gimmicky, and doesn't even stick out in the track listing somehow. Oftentimes when I put this on, I don't even notice it's there. The two tracks that never left my favorites are the opener, Cipater, and the fourth track, Cichli. Undoubtedly the two highest points on this project. The former has these rattling, clanking, processed metallic noises that sound like a wheel on some weird machine that just continues at the same pace, which create a strangely compelling groove, while some thin, barely present melodies just kind of waft over the top and pluck away. And there's a change-up partway through into some similar rhythms that give the track more dimensionality. That's a really nice one. And Cichli is undoubtedly the strongest point on the album for me. The beats slap and clap together in the same way those on the opener do. However, the melodies that come on top, while they start out kind of chilling and cold and like everything else here, There's something more inviting about them, and they progressively get warmer and more calming as you go along, swelling into some faux orchestral pads a la Silverside. If this album takes place in an Alaskan town full of assholes, this track is like you've met the one person in this town who's actually nice to you. It's the one definite keeper from this project. The rest of this tracks here, none of them are bad, but none of them are incredible. They range from being good to alright. Tiwi is a skittery track with these airy melodic textures that kind of make me feel like I'm sitting in some like really drafty building. It's fine enough, but not really a track I look forward to. Hub runs along very mechanically, though at a very irregular stop-start pace. Like a machine that has like 5 pieces missing and doesn't run properly, but nobody bothered to replace those parts because it still did the job it was supposed to. And the melodies in the background sound kind of like MIDI pizzicato strings, like they're out of some kind of creepy forest level in a video game. I do like those melodic textures, although the whole track does run on a bit long for its own good, and not gonna act like this is one I really look forward to either. Some of the tracks in the back half are actually pretty fun though. Calbruc has a beat almost out of some kind of boom-bap hip-hop track with these airy wheezing synths around it and some melodic textures that are surprisingly melancholic and delicate. MIDI French horns that honk out way in the background like they came from a ship's foghorn, plinking synth bells that feel like falling snowflakes, and that track's also fairly short. It gets in and out quickly to leave an impression on me but not wear itself out. Which is more than I can say for Rikuri. A track that has a lot of sounds in common with the tracks around it, like Calbruc, but probably did not need to break 9 minutes. It's got its rattling beats not unlike those on the opener that never change up, drafty foghorn pads in the background. It's got kind of an unwelcoming, mildly unpleasant feel to it that it doesn't really stick with me. It does have an okay outro where some of those windy experimental textures just kind of float around and glitch themselves up and kind of fade into like clipping white noise. It's fine, I guess. Inoffensive, not annoying. But like Tiwi and Hub, I don't look forward to it. Pule is nice, kind of like a cross between Overhand and Yulquin, with its plucking melodies meandering around and almost resembling like steel drums or something, yet somehow not conveying any sense of warmth. It does also have these cloudy, watery washes of paths to give it some more body and texture and a barely present layer of high-pitched plinking that doesn't really become apparent until near the end. I do like its more laid-back feel. A track like this is welcome in the track listing, and it's not grating like Overhand either. But of course the melodies themselves don't form any kind of hook like Yulquin does. They just kind of pluck away aimlessly for ages. It's another one that probably didn't need to be as long as it was. And then finally we close with Nuane, which, that one's 13 minutes. Whenever I see the final track in an album from this era being that long, I expect the track to actually be like 5 minutes, and then there's a 3-minute hidden track after a long silence. I mean, spoilers, their next album, LP5, does just that. This album, though, no, it actually ends with a single 13-minute track. I guess it's trying to be this album's equivalent to Ursidio. And, I mean, actually, for the most part, that length is better justified than other moments on here. This is probably the most textured and layered track in the bunch. Several different layers of plunking melodies going all over the place while its crunching beats plod along underneath it. It all sounds pretty great, and might even be more textured and complex and have a more satisfying mix than Ursidio itself. That said, I hesitate to say I actually enjoy the track more. Ursidio, first and foremost, is actually catchy and easy to remember. This isn't. None of the melodies here ever really stick with me. And Nuane also really loses some steam after the first 5-6 minutes. The instrumental kind of more strips itself down around that point, becomes thinner and weaker. And this track also, unfortunately, has that whole outro of random glitchy noises that went on way too long for its own good. If it were maybe 20 seconds, that'd be fine, but instead it's like the entire last 3 minutes. Oftentimes I get to that part and I just want to fast forward through it. I do still think the track's good qualities win out in the end, but it doesn't quite reach greatness for me. So that's Chiastic Slide, and yeah, this project sure does exist. I'll be real, it's not one that I really feel enthusiastic about either way, if it wasn't obvious. It is, again, quite unique, and like I said at the beginning, it is the point at which Autechre can no longer possibly be mistaken for any other artists. It's certainly interesting to talk about and describe. Also, the idea of listening to this album, like, even 12 more times in the near future is not something that I feel opposed to. Is that actually gonna happen? No. Because this project has just always gone in one ear and out the other for me. It feels fresh every time I put it on, but that's just because I barely remember it even directly after I finished listening to it. There's nothing I truly dislike here. It has none of their worst tracks, but it also has none of my biggest personal favorites. Cichli may be a very good track and my personal favorite from here, but I don't think it's like in my top 10 favorites from them ever. I guess at the end of the day, I do think this album is worth giving a shot. A lot of people have gotten into it a lot more than I have, so you can feel free to take me with a grain of salt on all of this. But this just doesn't really stick out to me as their best work. It's cool, but I don't consider it to be anything special. I'm overall feeling a 6.7 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.